Hey everybody, welcome to the Kind Faith Couples Podcast. We're glad you tuned in. We're in a series called Verses, and we're talking about this versus that in relationships. We've talked about roommate versus life mate. Today we're talking about hopes versus expectations.
Yep. So what do you think about expectations?
There's a truth that happens in marriage. I've done how many marriages and weddings have I done?
A lot.
A lot over the course of my
Hundreds.
life. A lot of pre-marriage counseling. And one of the things that's absolutely true in pre-marriage counseling that I see is both parties, both participants in this marriage have a whole lot of hopes for their marriage. And the hopes are on the cusp of becoming expectations, but they're not quite there yet. But when they put on the ring, those hopes get moved somehow. I'm not sure what happens, but moved from, gosh, I hope our life looks like this, or I hope our dreams are get fulfilled this way, to I expect. And hopes and expectations become a constant battle in marriage. We've had a bit of that. We could go through a laundry list, but tell them about the doors.
The doors. Well, I was actually thinking, just to amplify the hopes turning into expectations and sometimes into demands in a marriage, and then you're all of a sudden so upside down in your relationship and it becoming toxic is so we just don't want you to get to that point, or if you are at that point, to take a step back and pause and reflect. So doors,
hopes and expectations.
Okay, so here we are. Hopes. When we were dating, Jeff would open the car door for me. Small gesture, but an important one. And then as things moved along, we got married and he still opened the car door, and then we had a child, and now all of a sudden you're dealing with, car seats and buckets and strollers and all this equipment and
poopy diapers and vomit
and changing the diaper in the back hatch of the car or the trunk, whatever. So, and then that opening the car door and that gesture towards me became less important because we were dealing with the child and all of that equipment. So, but then what happens is your children grow up.
Can I pause really quick? So early on when I was opening the car door for you, what was your mindset and attitude around that?
That was an expectation. I mean, when we were dating, it was a hope, but it was because it was kind of a determining factor. Is he a gentleman? And all of that in the dating phase. And then
and when I opened the door for you, it was a delight. It was nice. It was a gift. It felt good. It felt like the courting. And then we moved into being married, and it kind of slid into a bit of expectation. Like, this is how it's supposed to roll, correct?
Yeah.
And then when your expectation was disappointed with car seats and all of that kind of stuff, what began to happen with you?
Well, initially with the car seats, you're just wanting to get in the car. Because you won't have a certain amount of time before that child starts crying, and you want to get whatever you're trying to do done. So there was just give in that period. But then when our son grew up and was, around 8 or 9 or whatever, and I don't even remember how long it was, but it's like, wait, what happened to the opening the door thing? And why is that not happening? And do I want my son, or our son, that at that point it was my son, to grow up without seeing the example of what a gentleman does towards a woman in our family? And I know not all families are like that, but it was important for me.
So here's what happens, and this is why this is so important to talk about. We have hopes, and when our partner fulfills our hopes, it's a delight, and it's a joy, and it grows love. When hopes move into expectations, it creates space for bitterness. And the fulfillment of expectations really just gets you to a neutral place in your relationship. The fulfillment of hopes creates joy. The fulfillment of expectations creates just, okay, this is how it's supposed to be.
Drudgery.
I'm satisfied. Right. Drudgery on the person who's responsible for fulfilling it, and just good. I'm glad you finally did it for the person who was expecting it. And all of that is complemented by this reality that we also have needs, right? You had a need that our son would experience what a gentleman should do, and you had a need to be honored. So here's where it's tricky. The need needs to be expressed by the person who has the need. That person needs to guard that need from becoming an expectation that is a root of bitterness. And so it's a hope that the need would be fulfilled. And as the need is expressed as a hope, then the partner gets to delight his or her spouse with behavior that fulfills the hope. And it in process brings great joy. Is that what you experienced when I started opening the card work?
Again.
Yeah,
and now my son opens it for me. So
mission accomplished.
I know. Boop boop. Got that done. Checked it off. Yeah. But the same thing was not just the car door, but house doors and all those doors.
Yeah, and there's a tension here, and it's important to say you're never going to be without expectations. Let's put expectations over here, right?
Okay.
And then and you want to have hopes. It's way better to be a person who hopes a lot and has few expectations. Why? Well, there's just a lot less disappointment and a lot less frustration and a lot less anger. That's just like the fact, right? But you're never going to get to zero expectations. So you've got hopes, and here's our homework for you. And the homework is make a list of all the things, and don't share this with your spouse, right? That would be a disaster. But personally make a list of all your expectations.
Okay, so what about needs? Because I have an expectation that you're going to help me around the house.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when people are coming over,
Mm-hmm.
and there's going to be like...
What's the difference there?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like if I come home and you've invited somebody over, and I'm doing the cooking, the cleaning, the prep, the setting the table, that is beyond a hope.
Two big differences.
Okay.
Right? There's two big differences. I'm glad you asked that question. An expectation is unspoken. So an expectation is generally something that doesn't get said. It's just expected that it happen, and the person of whom it's expected is surprised. So that's one big reality to that. The other part is that the expectations can be separate from real needs. So you can have an expectation that actually doesn't have to do with your actual needs. So it could be, hey, I expect my husband to be home at 5 o'clock every night. And you can ask the question, is that a need, or is that just something that's a pattern and a habit and something that you expect? So those are two parts to expectation. However, expectations get connected to needs, right?
Right.
So the trick is articulating your need and then making sure your spouse hears your need and giving them an opportunity to help. And when they disappoint, because they will disappoint, being able to continually communicate and be angry and be frustrated and all of that kind of stuff around expressed needs.
So one of the things that happened when we were young in our marriage was, I'd be doing the dishes or wrapping up after dinner, and Jeff would be watching TV, and I'd say, hey, could you please take out the trash? Because it's got to go out, and I'm like cleaning the entire kitchen. And he'd say, hey, yeah, sure, sure, I'll take out the trash. But the expectation is now for a girl. It's like when I was early in my marriage, all of us that were early in all of our friend group that were early in our marriage, we were all like, does this happen to you? That the guy doesn't get it, that it's now and not after the ball game or after the next touchdown or whatever. And that's true. That's what happens. So,
and that is such that's a perfect illustration, because in my mind, I'm like, yeah, you know, and
sure,
right after this series of plays, I want to see if they score the touchdown, and then I'm on it. And the need was partially expressed, right? The need was take out trash now. And it just wasn't completed. And so if that little 3-letter word would have been added to the end, I would have gotten it. And we could have had our conflict and frustrated and why does it have to be now and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. That's going to be the natural thing that happens. But it's the expectation that creates the root for bitterness that causes the problem. And the fact that I didn't respond now led to disappointed expectation, me being surprised. Why are you upset? I said I would do it, right? What are you, why are we fighting about this? So all that stuff happens. And if we can put aside our expectation and return to hope, it just is such a healing thing for us. So here was the homework. I was moving us toward homework, and the homework is this. Make a list of your expectations. What are your expectations? And then this. Are there a few of those expectations you could convert back to hopes or articulate as needs? So expectations there, things that are creating bitterness for you. Then could you move some of those back to hopes, or do you need to articulate some of those as needs and be really specific about them and have a conversation about them? That's the homework. It sounds simple. It takes some time, but it'll be a great ministry to you as you move out of expectations and into hopes.
And don't assume that your spouse understands your need. They don't. They don't.
No.
I mean, that's just categorically, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
So you really have to communicate is what he's saying
mm-hmm.
in a simpler language. But yeah. So I have a Bible verse for us because we like to God is smarter than me for sure.
Wow.
Did I need to say that? Okay. Okay. Proverbs 10:28. The hope of the righteous is gladness, but the expectation of the wicked perish. The expectations of the wicked perish. And so,
isn't that a cool juxtaposition?
Mm-hmm.
Hope and expectation are right there in that passage. And expectation is connected to the wicked. Not that anybody who has an expectation is sinning and wicked.
Right.
But it's this incredible contrast. And isn't it just, really at the bottom line, isn't it better to be someone who hopes? And don't you want a spouse that just hopes in you instead of expects from you?
Which is what happened at your wedding. There were all those hopes. And so you kind of need to go back to that point when he really isn't trying to annoy me. He just might not know.
And
or vice versa.
Yeah. And so, really a lot of this is back to communication. But read that scripture passage one more time.
And so to take us out, I know Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans for a hope and a future. And God hopes in us. He hopes in us. That's our future, is his hope. He wants us to have hope. He has hope for us. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to love and what true love is. Like the Corinthians passage. It's not a
unconditional love has no expectations.
Right.
Yeah. And we want to love each other unconditionally and hopefully for one another the way God hopes in us.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, thank you for tuning in. We hope this is helpful.
Right. I love that. We hope that this is helpful.
Good point.
But we have an expectation that it is too. Bye, guys.